Hello everyone, my name is Keri Ramirez and I am the Managing Director of Studymove, and it's an absolute pleasure to connect with you today. Today we have our 6 key data update of 2023. I believe it's going to be a very interesting session. We're going to look at the main data trends from basically the first half of 2023 with the idea of understanding what happened in that first half of this year, but also looking to answer a very important questions that I think is in the mind of a lot of universities here in Australia at the moment. Are we actually heading into a boom of international students? And this question actually comes because in the last 6-9 months, we have seen a very positive outlook and some very positive results in how universities are engaging again with international students. So we really need to take the time just to see if this particular trend will continue, if this trend actually means that we are heading into a boom. And with that in mind, we're actually gonna show to you some very interesting analysis. So I'm just gonna start sharing my presentation with all of you today. So let's just start this presentation. And today we are gonna try to answer probably the main question that everybody has in the sector at the moment. The main question is, are we heading to a boom in international student numbers? And this question comes from a couple of months, actually more than a couple of months, of very positive news in the number of students arriving and commencing across the international education sector in Australia. And I think that for education providers, the main question is this a temporal effect? If this is something that is a lagging effect that comes from COVID, or is something new that we see in the market that will continue, which is important so we can actually plan for the future and have better perspective. So we're going to look at the data that it's available in the public domain to answer this question, but also we're going to take the opportunity to take you through answering other questions like what's different now? It has been a few months, nearly probably, I will say 12 months effectively, since education providers have been engaging again with international applicants as a result of open borders. So it's important just to start highlighting what we see that is different nowadays in comparison to what we saw back in 2019. And finally, we're also going to talk about something that is very important because we have also seen that in the narrative of this positive news of students coming back, also there is a contrast on what universities are reporting in terms of their revenue. We hear that some universities, actually quite a lot of universities in Australia, are reporting deficits in 2022. So we want to try and just to connect and to see what is this relationship between this positive aspect that we have seen in the market, but also how this is transferring or not necessarily to revenue for the universities. Okay. Now, we will have time to answer some questions at the end, but as we usually do, we have the co-founder of Studymove, Dimitri Hokel, in the chat. She will say hi to you in a minute, just in case you have any questions, but also just to let you know, we'll have time for questions and answers afterwards. And also feel free to contact us a little bit later. We're more than happy just to answer questions that you have. It's important to say that what we present in this analysis is what we see from the information that we have access to. But of course, we understand that there are many different ways to see this. We just want to make a contribution and complement your own institutional analysis with the information that we are putting together. So if you have any questions, any views, feel free to put it or ask at the end of the session, or just contact us and we can have a conversation a bit later. In the few months that we have been doing key data updates, it seems that people prefer just to have conversations one-on-one. So we're more than happy to do whatever works for you. Okay. All right. Now, to answer these questions, we're actually going to use 3 sets of data. The first one is the great data that we have from the Department of Education. And I always say this, we are very fortunate in Australia because we have access to one of the best data sets in terms of international education that you can find in the world. And the data from the Department of Education is an excellent source to understand what's happening. So we're going to have a close look to that. But we're also going to complement to something that is clearly a leading indicator on how things will progress in the next probably 12 or 18 months, which is the data in terms of student visas, in particular student visas who have been lodged recently, which means that it gives you an idea of how students are thinking or what kind of students are thinking to come in the next probably 6 or 12 months. So looking at the Department of Home Affairs information, we're actually going to look at the student visas data. And we're also going to look at our own Studymove data. As you know, we at Studymove, we collect a vast amount of information for different areas, in areas like outbound mobility, but also in terms of student recruitment, things like fees, scholarships, how universities are engaging with education agents, articulation. We have a lot of information, and we're actually picking some of that we think is relevant just to understand and answer this question of, are we heading into a boom or maybe not? All right. So that's basically where is basically the foundation of this analysis. And I think we all agree that the last probably 6 or 7 months have been extraordinary in terms of the optimism and the positive vibe that exists in the sector. I have the impression that 2022 was the year where we reconnect with international applicants, but also we saw the return of international students. So all the efforts made by universities were based on that, on reconnect with our group of students or prospective students. And in this 2023 in particular, in the first 6 months, this is when we finally have seen the initial results of those efforts. And also all the efforts done during COVID just to maintain that engagement with the market. And overall, and I'm going to show you the figures, the metrics are very positive. And I think that's a reflection on the vibe that we see in the sector. Now, we know that there are challenges. We know that there is a challenge on student retention. We still have the challenge of cost of living and accommodation. But in general, when you go to a conference or you talk to some of your colleagues, there is a general feeling of being positive in the area of how we're actually engaging and the results that we're getting in terms of connecting with new students. And in fact, the data supports that vibe. What you're going to see on the screen is actually the historical numbers of the year-to-date May numbers, so basically each period from January to May in the number of student commencements. And just as a reminder, we reached our peak number of 96,000 international students. This is for higher education who commenced in 2019 in that same period, year-to-date May, which basically tells you everything that happened in the first half of each year because most of the main intakes happen in that particular period. From there, we don't want to talk about that. It was, the dark time of COVID, and we reached the bottom of only 64,000 students starting in 2021. We saw a recovery in 2022, and then bang, an absolute impressive growth in the number of student commencements. We have never had that crossing line in the first half of a year of more than 100,000 international commencements for higher education. And I think you can see it in the visual graph. It's not only a plane taking off in the way in which the chart is moving, it's basically skyrocketing. It's an impressive growth what we have seen. And this basically represents 44% more in comparison to last year, 64% more than 2021, which is remarkable, the rebound that the sector is having, and about 10% more than the peak that we had before the pandemic, which is an extraordinary result. And I think, as I said, this basically is a result, and that's why you understand the positive vibe that exists across the sector, okay? Now, looking at the detail, it's always great to see the overall numbers, but looking at the detail, and when we compare these results by nationality, and we compare where we were in 2022 and where we are now, you can see that our world map is mainly in green. Like the countries that you see in green is countries that they had a positive growth in comparison to last year, same period. And the ones in red, the ones that had not shown any growth. What is quite interesting is to see that some regions, like for example, the Middle East and North Africa, are already experiencing a 16% growth. North Asia, 6% more. Southeast Asia, really good growth, 27%. The only one that, and there's a lot of views about this, is the Americas, is 12% less. And as you can see in the map, is mainly South America, the one that is not showing any positive growth. But the one that is showing some impressive and obviously extraordinary is the word to describe it, growth, is South Asia, with 105% growth in comparison to 2002. This is a significant growth that is experienced at the higher education sector. Now, probably this is not the news about South Asia are not nothing new for you, but I think that what is important just to say is that is basically all the main regions are growing, but is South Asia the one that is growing the most? And I'm saying this because back in 2018 and 2019, the growth that we saw in the sector mainly came from two countries, China and India. Nowadays is mainly all sectors, all regions, sorry. Actually, a growth of 16% back in 2019, we'll be cheering for that. So I think that some universities are thinking about just focus the resources in South Asia, but the result, the reality is that actually there is growth in most of the regions as well. So thinking about diversifying your resources, it will be effective because obviously this is showing that there are opportunities in most of the regions. But of course, Southeast Asia is actually showing this extraordinary growth. And we see that clearly when we actually look at the top 10 nationalities in terms of student commencements. China is still our #1 source country, and it had a pretty good growth of 7%, considering that China actually just opened borders effectively a few months ago. And then from there, you see that is the South Asia countries, the one that are actually showing some really important and impressive growth, like India with 120%, Pakistan 200% growth, Sri Lanka 85%, Bangladesh 100%, Bhutan, which is, it seems to be that is a temporary effect, but still is an extraordinary result. So this is actually giving you a good picture of where we're heading. And also it's giving us an indication that some of our source or top shelf markets and the position that they have are changing in comparison to what we saw in 2019. Not significantly yet, but definitely countries that they used to be in the top 10, like Indonesia, is not at the top 10 anymore. South Korea actually is not tracking as it used to be, the same like Japan. So there are some changes in the market that I think everybody should be aware. What is also very interesting, thinking about how things are changing, it's important just to look at the details, at the numbers. And for me, it has been quite interesting just to follow the change in study level. And these are our top three source markets. And this is a really good example of some changes that we have seen. In China, for example, in the same period in 2019, we had a distribution, as you can see it here, of pretty much 50-50 postgraduate commencements. It was 51 versus 49 undergraduate. Now this has changed, and now we actually have seen an increase in postgraduate commencement. So there is a shift in the number of students moving more to a postgraduate market than what we saw back in 2019. India, that it was historically a postgraduate market with 73%, now is actually shifting a little bit more on to undergraduate candidates and commencements. And Nepal, which was also 50-50, is actually shifting to a larger proportion of undergraduate students. Now, it is an early stage. It's just the first half of 2023. But it's important just to be aware about these changes because, as you all know, it's very different to do recruitment for postgraduate cohorts than undergraduate cohorts. There's a different decision makers. Undergraduate, of course, the parents play a more important role, different to mature age students. So it's important just to see that these changes are happening in the market. And also, this is telling us that it's a new group of students. It's not a lagging effect coming from COVID-19. This is a different type of students. It's not an undergraduate student who has been waiting for 4 years to come to Australia. There is a change into that. And I think this is really giving us an indication that what we are looking in the number of commencements, this growth of commencements, is for something that is something new on the market and not necessarily a lagging effect that exists before. Now, looking at the markets, I think it's very, very important just to take a moment in looking at China. China, who has been traditionally the #1 source market for higher education in Australia. And we know that because of the challenges that China had with COVID, and many other reasons, but mainly for that reason, the number of commencements, and looking at the same period in the last 5 years, they have been below what we have seen in 2019. In fact, in our modeling at the start of the year, we basically thought, I don't think that we're going to see a significant growth from China. At the moment, it's just minimum in comparison to 2002, where we had 26,000 students. Now we have close to 28,000 students. But what is quite interesting, and this is when comparing the metrics is extremely valuable, is when we look at the number of students lodged from Chinese students also in the first half of the year. And you're going to see that there is a very different trend here. From flat numbers in commencements, we actually see a very interesting V-shaped curve that is showing us a really significant growth in the number of student visas lodged. In fact, we are actually 121% more than when we had in 2019. So actually, we have number of visas lodged above the levels that we had in 2019, which also is a really clear indication that the Chinese market will bounce back for Australia. And we may see at the end of the year, or maybe at the start of 2014, the same levels that we saw back in 2019, or if this trend continues, even more, which is very, very good in terms of how we can engage again with this group of students who traditionally have been extremely important for the higher education and the international education sector in Australia. Okay? All right. So in terms of student commencements, there are some really positive signs. And obviously, there is something that is creating this great optimism. I think that there is some indication that shows that this is not a lagging effect. I think that it could be a few countries, as I say, like Bhutan, that probably they had closed borders until 2022. So it was maybe a pipeline of students coming from that particular market. But in general, it seems, and the market is giving us an indication that this is actually a new demand. Now, to start having a feeling of for how long this will continue, once again, it's very useful just to see the growth in students' visas lodged. And in that particular area, also the numbers are as impressive as what we saw with commencements. As you can see, the number of students' visas lodged for higher education in Australia, it's significantly higher. We have never seen these levels before. From the peak that we had of nearly 115,000, a little bit more in 2019, we are 44% more. It's substantial. I'm not saying 10% more, 5% more. It's 44% more. I think this really gives a lot of reassurance that we're going to see that the demand will continue, or the results that we're going to see, actually. The results we're going to see in the next half of the year and the start of 2014 will continue. Like there is actually growth that will continue. And the other interesting indicator is that these visas that have been lodged have been mainly lodged outside of Australia. So we haven't really seen this is not an effect of a large onshore market where students are progressing probably from English language or from BETS to higher education. This is actually students who have not been in Australia. They're going to be new students who are actually showing interest. And of course, they're applying for their visas to come in the next 12 months. So I think this is another quite solid indication that this growth and these positive results will continue for another 12 months. Okay? Now, as I said, these metrics are giving us probably a medium-term view of what's happening. Probably for the next 6 months, probably 12, perhaps 18 months, is giving us this indication that this will continue. But I think that what everybody has in mind is probably beyond that period, trying just to see if in the horizon, we're going to see even more increase in the demand for international education programs of international education, especially in Australia. Now, there are two sources that I think it shows that this actually is very possible that it will continue. One great set of forecasting was done by the Tourism Research Australia, which is a branch of Austrade, and they have been based the analysis on growth, and it's not only for international education, they do it in general for tourism, that includes education-related travel, but they see that change in the demographics, especially in our regions, in Asia Pacific, and growth in the economic outlook will actually lead to a continued growth at least until 2027. So that's a really good source that if you want to look into it, will give you a better reassurance of where are we heading. But it seems that definitely that will continue. But also, I think that it's very, very interesting just to look at the forecast made by Navitas. And this, I have to say, has been one of the best pieces of research that I have seen in a long time. The level of detail, the different variables that Navitas has put together. And of course, when you are forecasting, you cannot predict the future, but it's really mapping where are we heading. And this forecast from Navitas is expecting, well, it's basically showing that the demand for international education will continue growth at least until 2030. It's definitely something that is worth to read and to see it in more detail because, of course, what Navitas is telling us, and I think that the Austrade results, the Austrade report says that as well, is that the fact that it will be demand, that doesn't mean that automatically students will come. I think that it's important just to acknowledge that changes in the demographic, changes on the interest on tertiary education across the world will bring that demand, but that's just the opportunities that will be there for institutions. Institutions and study destinations, they need to do the right set of policies and strategies just to engage in that market. But definitely will be opportunities, at least based on this modeling, until 2030. So as you can see, what the data is really telling us is, yes, currently we're experiencing a great growth in the number of student commencements. The growth seems that it will continue based on what we see in terms of student visas. These long-term models are showing us that demand will keep existing for everyone, not only for Australia. This is the global demand. But one of the big questions that we are getting is, okay, Keri, this sounds amazing. This sounds really positive. But why we are still hearing that universities are still having challenges from a revenue point of view? Why, if commencements are looking so great and we actually had 44% more commencement than last year, why that hasn't really flown necessarily to revenue? Well, to answer that question, I think there are two very important metrics that we need to look at. The first one is just to acknowledge that although we have seen a very significant growth on international student commencements, this is new students, the actual total cohort of enrollments is still below the levels that we had in 2019. We haven't really reached that level that we had in the peak pre-pandemic. And the revenue comes from both, comes from continuing, but also to new students. You can see it here clearly. We are actually tracking a lot better than 2022. And this boost coming from commencements is really helping, but we haven't been able really to reach that level. We're only 3% more than 2021 when we see the same period in comparison to previous years. We're still 8% less than 2019. And this is important because I think this is when the narrative that we hear in the sector is giving us a little bit of a short circuit. It's like, okay, things look really promising, but then they're telling me that we still have a revenue issue. And having said that, of course, this is talking about international revenue from international student fees. Universities are facing revenue in other areas like domestic, commercialization of research. This is just looking at the revenue coming from international student fees. And this is clearly showing that we haven't reached that level when we see the complete picture of what's happening out there. Okay? Now, on top of that, I think it's important just to acknowledge another factor that, in my view, is affecting the revenue that universities are actually obtaining as a result of their international student efforts. And this is probably one of the most popular queries, probably my top 5 queries that I've been getting in the last probably 3 or 4 months. Universities are starting to question the role of the scholarships and how, now that we have very positive market conditions, how important it's going to be to keep or not the scholarships. Because, I think everybody is aware that scholarships may lead to a positive result, but also there's a cost in the revenue that you are losing. So let me just take you, because we have been very lucky at Studymove that we have been collecting a large and very comprehensive data set of the scholarships offers to new international students in Australia. So we had a very close look, and we have been doing this for a couple of universities. We have been looking into what's happening, what's in offering, and then do some modeling to understand how this has been affecting the revenue of universities. Now, our analysis started back in 2017. And let me just take you through how we have been progressing in the use of a scholarship across Australian universities since 2017. And this is based on what we have been collecting, that is scholarships for new international students. And what I think is fascinating is that when you look at the story, it's just like textbook case study of microeconomics 101 of what happens when many players start discounting their prices. So the story it was back in 2017, when we collect the data the first time, we identified that pretty much a lot of universities have certain levels of scholarships, but it was mainly really just to attract a talent or for equity. It was only very few players that they were using scholarships as a discounting mechanism just to really be more competitive price-wise, and of course, just to obtain a larger market share. That was in 2017, 2018, pretty much things didn't change. And 19, we saw a little bit of an increase of more universities following this strategy. During COVID, this is when we saw that the majority of universities, they jump into the scholarship wagon. And the reason why universities did this, to be fair, is because, of course, we were dealing with a massive emergencies, a lot of uncertainties, but also in many cases, the scholarships were to compensate the fact that international students were unable to have that on-campus experience. So discounting the fee kind of makes sense just to say, look, I acknowledge that I'm not giving you a full experience. So there you go, there is a discount. But this is when we saw that period, we saw an important growth in the number of universities using scholarships. Now, the macroeconomic theory tells you that the more players are discounting, the less the effects of these discounting will be for your, your effort to have additional market share. Currently, this is 2023 numbers. This is the latest results that we had. 33 universities are actually actively using scholarships to attract new applicants. And what we have done is that we really look, because there are all different types of scholarships, we look at what scholarships are part of the core elements of our recruitment strategy. 33 universities have something that actively helps them, and it's part, you see the website, and it's just out there. So it's 33. I'm not saying this is wrong or right. Everybody is trying to do their best. But unfortunately, what you see in terms of microeconomics, and I think everybody understands this, is that when you have many players doing that same strategy, the strategy actually starts to dilute, and the effects and how competitive things are actually dilute significantly. You think about a student who has an offer for 5 universities, and the 5 universities are offering 20% scholarship. There is no competitive advantage. The one that is winning is the student, of course, and that's what happens when you see this from a microeconomic point of view. Usually these kind of scenarios is the consumer that is winning, but from a competitive point of view and advantage, it really dilutes and fades away. Now, when we look at the detail, it's quite interesting to see where we are heading. What you're going to see at the moment is really what we identify as the flagship scholarships that these 33 universities have. And the percentage of the scholarship offer, it actually, there is an interesting range. We have 2 that offer 10% scholarships, 4 that offer 15% scholarships. But then we have a large group, which you can see here. Let me just keep going. This group here is about 20 universities that they offer between 20 and 25% reduction in fees. Now, this is, in my opinion, quite generous, 25% reduction in fees. But besides that, that's just my view if it's generous or not. Really, there are a lot of players offering this, which, as you can understand, the competitive advantage of offering something additional is, once again, is diluted. It's very different to what happened in 2017, when if you are the only one doing that, of course, you will see a larger effect. And I'm not trying to say this is good or wrong. I'm just trying to map out where we are, because this is what universities have been asking us recently. So they have a better understanding of how they can actually move forward and how they more effectively can use or stop using scholarships to engage with applicants. So that's where we are at the moment. Now, the other thing that is interesting just to analyze and to put some, making a kind of trying just to complement the analysis is how much these efforts will cost to a university. I'm just gonna share with you a scenario. This is just obviously an average university. So we can start measuring if the cost or the loss of revenue compensates the effect of scholarships or not. So let's think about a university. I'm talking about an average university that recruits every year about 1,000 commencements. They actually charge the average annual fee, international fee, which this is actually a true number. This is the annual average fee, is $36,000. So that university in that particular year, from that group of new students, will get about $36 million in revenue. Okay. Now, let's just see the different scenarios, thinking about not everybody gets a scholarship. Maybe 3 out of 4 students get a scholarship. I have to say that in that aspect, it varies. Some universities probably offer scholarships that will only be for 30% of their new student cohort, some others 50, some others is actually for everybody. It's unlimited and is basically a discounting option. All right. So this scenario, the average university that offers 10% scholarships, the cost or the loss in revenue is about $2.7 million. Then we go $3.2 million. And then for the average, which is this one here, which is about 20%, it will be $5.4 million. So that means that if you add the cost of commissions paid to agents, and this is just estimates, of course, I'm just trying just to illustrate where we are at. The cost of using scholarships and commissions is about between 25 and 30% of your revenue from the new group of students. Is it high? Is it low? I let you to decide. But this is basically the cost of a scholarship initiative. I think that the issue here is also how much you are getting as a result of doing this. And once again, back in 2017, 2018, when only a few players were using this strategy, maybe there is very positive results that suggest that that's the way to go. But when you have 33 universities doing it, I think that the results or the positive effects may be diluting. Okay? Now, the other thing that has been quite interesting that I didn't notice until recently is that from these 33 universities, 30 actually offer the scholarship for the total duration of the program. I ask because we also look into this space with our friends in New Zealand, and the majority of the New Zealand universities, they only offer the scholarship for the first year. And I asked them, why you are not doing the total duration? And they said, well, Keri, we cannot afford it. And I was like, yeah, well, also it's true. These effects in revenue, they only are for the first year. They actually are for the total duration of the students. And there is a compound effect because let's just think about this scenario. You have 1,000 commencements every year. You offer a 20% scholarship for the duration of the program. So the first year will be probably the cost or the loss of revenue, $5.4 million. But then on the second year, it duplicates because you are covering the scholarship for the students who start the previous year and the new year. And then it just keeps growing, as you can see on the chart. This is just modeling, it's scenarios, but I just want to illustrate something that it seems is happening on the market. And what I just want to invite universities, I'm sure that a lot of you are doing it, but I think it's interesting because it seems that these effects of scholarships are really affecting their revenue. And it's just important just to put in perspective to see and to basically assess if these effects of the scholarships, which I'm sure that they are positive for a few universities or for a lot of them, actually basically outweigh the cost in revenue. I think that now that we are far away from COVID, now that it seems that we have positive market conditions, it seems that it's logical that we need to start to reviewing the scholarship programs and just basically making that assessment. How much is costing me? What's the benefit? And if that's the case, how to move forward with this. But once again, thinking about that, as the theory will say, when you have many, many players in that particular place, the competitive advantage obviously dilutes. I think that's something that it makes sense. And for that reason, I think it's just useful just to consider a few changes that may happen because some universities are asking me, so how can I actually withdraw from this? How am I going to move away from it? Well, there are a few initial steps that I think are recommended. I think it's important to move away from unlimited scholarships. I don't necessarily think that that's a requirement anymore under the new market conditions. I think having a limited number of scholarships, 150 in institutions will decide. It's healthy. It's healthy from a planning point of view. It's healthy from an understanding of how this will affect the recruitment strategies. Because when it's unlimited, I think that there is a lot of distortions that could happen. And more importantly, you just don't know how much it's going to cost you just to run this particular strategy. I also think it's healthy just to review the amounts. Do we need 20% these scholarships or 25 or even 30 anymore? Do we need to really give scholarship for every single courses when some courses are extremely popular? And also, do we really need to offer a scholarship for every single market? I think to start narrowing will really help just to be more effective in this particular space, which basically what I'm saying is that it's completely worth it. And I think when you see the amounts that I present in these scenarios, I think it's very worth just to take some time just to see if you're actually winning or not as a result of these strategies. Because as I said, this corral is working really well for some universities, good, but maybe for others, it's a lagging effect. Things are moving very quickly. We haven't had the time to look into this. I think this is a really good opportunity and good time, especially because we have a much better market conditions that, of course, we had during the period of COVID. But because of that, and because that enrollments are still at the levels that we had, not even at the levels that we had in 2019, I think that's why, although we have this great optimism and we have seen great and extraordinary good results from commencements, it hasn't really translated necessarily to the levels of revenue. I don't think a university is reporting a lot of universities will report probably 20% growing commencements. I don't think you'll be a university that will report 20% in revenue. So I think that is just the clash. And I think the data is really going to help us just to understand that more effectively. Also, just as a final remarks, I think it's important to be aware that we're starting to see some signs, some changes in the market. So just periodically review. If you see anything, it will be very useful just to tune it. I think it's perfectly understandable that we went back to the market using our 2019 handbook with a few ideas in mind that takes time to implement. But just to ensure that those new ideas get implemented effectively, it's just good to track the pulse of the market and the changes in the market, especially at that study level distribution. I think that's going to be very important. And the reality is that revenue will take longer. I think that from a planning point of view, it's important just to acknowledge that probably it's going to be until 2024 when we're going to see probably the healthy levels of revenue that universities require to reach their institutional goals. But let's see what happens. We just want to put some additional perspective and some ideas for everybody just to look at in case you haven't seen them before. Okay. So based on this, we still have the question, are we heading towards a boom or not? Well, a boom basically is defined as a period of rapid and significant growth. I don't think we have reached that point yet. We have seen rapid and significant growth in the new number of students coming in, but when you really see the complete picture and basically the whole thing in terms of revenue and enrollments, we haven't even reached growth. We are still in recovery mode. So for that reason, I don't think we are heading to a boom yet. It's very early to say that, but definitely what we're experiencing, and I think we should celebrate because this is a result of efforts made by people like you and many, many others, is that we're actually having a speedy and extraordinary recovery at the international education sector, higher education in Australia. Good. All right. So I hope you enjoy the presentation. As I said, this is just something that we have seen and we want to share. We'll keep our eyes on the market. Once again, thank you for everybody for your feedback and your support. It has been great to be part of this journey with all of you, especially seeing this positive vibe that exists. And I'm pretty sure that it will continue because that's basically what the data is telling us, but it's going to take time just to see the complete recovery happening. Okay? All right, let's see if we have any questions. I see. Invite everybody just to look internally and to run your own scenarios and see what's happening. Some of the work that we have done with some universities has shown that conversion hasn't really changed. What you are actually getting is a larger number of applicants. Once again, that could be the result of better market conditions, not the result of the scholarship necessary. So the assessment is not that easy. I completely acknowledge that, but I think we need to start making those assessments just to have a better idea of how we can move forward. And really, I insist, it's not, sometimes with the scholarships, especially with a marketing purposes, and it's true, scholarships would have many, many different purposes, but when it's for marketing purposes, sometimes there is this view that is wrong or is good, they're good or bad. It's not about that. It's really to finding the right balance that really help you just to reach your institutional goals, because it could work in some markets and not in other markets also as well. So it's a bit more complicated. I understand that. Okay. Okay. Perfect. I think that's it. Thank you so much for everybody who joined the session. Once again, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you, it was just about 45 minutes, so we are on time. We'll be in touch with you if you have any more questions, any views. I know this one in particular has different angles, different ways to see it, but I think at the end of the day, we just need to start questioning what are we doing so we can actually move forward. And once again, thank you so much for joining and for your time. Excellent. Take care. See you later, everybody.